Coming up on At Issue, according to economic development officials in Coles County, it's been a good year. We'll have Angela Griffin, the president of Coles Together, in the studio next for a discussion about economic development, successes, challenges, and upcoming projects in our area. That's next on At Issue, so stay tuned. Welcome and thanks for joining us on At Issue. I'm your host, Fred Peralta. Attracting businesses and industry to a rural area can be a tough job, and keeping them here, well, it has challenges too. For Coles County, it's been a good year for industry with local warehouses filling up, several industrial expansions, and some new possibilities on the horizon. Much of that success can be attributed to a joint effort between cities and county, the communities, and economic development officials like Angela Griffin from the Coles Together. Angela, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, so let's start out at the basics. What is Coles Together and why should we care?
Coles Together is the county's economic development organization. About 27 years ago, the communities decided that rather than try to compete against each other and individually attract business and development, that they would pool their resources and create an economic development organization that worked on behalf of the whole county. So the organization was created. We are supposed to work with industry and manufacturing, the chamber and manufacturing. The chambers in both communities work on retail and service organization attraction and retention, and the cities try to attract big box type of operations. So Coles Together is focused solely on industry development, manufacturing, warehouse, and distribution. We work with the industry that is already in the county, and then we work to try to recruit new investment in the county.
So if I understand what you just said, there is still economic development done by individual communities and other organizations, but you all work together to try and coordinate your efforts, correct?
In this county, all the economic development is done at Coles Together, unless it is service or retail or big box type of attraction.
Well, what is the job, your job at Coles Together involved? How do you go about doing this attracting of business?
Well, it is an interesting industry, and it's one that fortunately repeats itself across Illinois and across the state, so there are some protocols involved. But primarily when a large manufacturing plant is looking at an expansion in an area that they don't currently exist in, they contact the state economic development organizations, and most states have one, and then they tell that state what their parameters are, what their geography is, what their infrastructure needs are, and then based on those kinds of parameters, the state looks outward, goes to the communities that may meet most of the criteria, and then the communities are allowed to put together a proposal, and that's what we do at Coles Together. When there is a company searching and Coles County has a lot of the criteria that the company needs, we put together a proposal, identify the best sites in the community, put together a proposal for the company to consider. And usually we're competing with other communities in Illinois. A lot of times we're competing across the Midwest, and sometimes it's a nationwide search. So what we have to do is showcase and highlight the benefits of being in this county and hope that we stand out among all of the other proposals that a company would consider.
How do you do that? How do you make yourself stand out in a crowded field?
Well, fortunately, in Coles County, we have a lot of amenities that other communities this size don't have. You know, we do have sort of the small town appeal. We have an ag background, and there's a work ethic that comes along with that we can provide in the workforce. We have an interstate that runs through the county. Many communities this size don't have an interstate. We're also fortunate that we have Eastern Illinois University and Lakeland Community College, both of which can provide training for manufacturers. And so, you know, we compete in this state, I would say, with communities on the size of Macomb, Illinois, and while they may have Western, there's not an interstate that runs through their community. Right. So in terms of logistics and transportation, we're fairly well suited. You know, there's a lot of comparison made to Effingham County, and of course Effingham has two interstates that come through the county, and it's tough to compete with that sometimes, but there are a lot of other amenities that Coles County has, and again, proximity to the interstate system, which helps manufacturers get their product back out to their customers.
So tell us about tell us about your year in economic development. We hear that it's been a great year, but how do you qualify a great year?
Well, and actually we'd like to say that we've had a great couple of years. You know, coming out of the recession, it was tough. and things were definitely slow. Manufacturers, while maybe they wanted to make investments, were hesitant to do so. I think companies were sitting on a lot of capital, and we slowly began to see that change as we came out of the recession. And going back 2 years, we would look to NCI in Mattoon. They are a manufacturer of building wall panel systems for industry. And they had looked right before the economy crashed for a site to begin some new production, put that project on hold, and then as the economy started to emerge, began looking again, and we had to compete with at least 2 other states and eventually won that project and that investment in new jobs. And Lester Buildings in Charleston, same kind of a thing. As the economy has picked up, the demand for their product has grown. They've slowly been adding jobs. They moved into a new facility. And then as we moved into this year, many of the other existing employers in the county began adding new product lines, adding jobs. We've seen just a recent announcement at General Electric that they're going to add 15 jobs. Another manufacturer in Mattoon is going to announce very soon that they'll be making an investment of about $10 million in adding jobs. Of course, the big project in the past 2 years was the Mars Pet Care project, and they're making about a $60 million investment in the county and adding between 50 and 60 jobs. The other phenomenon that has occurred is as we were in the recession, we were staring at a lot of empty industrial buildings in this county, on both sides of the county, in Mattoon and Charleston. And as it stands today, we have one 50,000 square foot building that is in the process of being vacated. And other than that, we have no empty buildings. And it was just a little over a year ago on the north side of Charleston that we were looking at the Dow plant being vacated, Arkwright was empty, and the former KZ Tool and Machine facility was empty. Those buildings are all back in production now, employees being hired at all of those locations. And the Trailmobile facility, which for many years was empty and just a giant hole in this community after Trailmobile packed up and left, that building, nearly 500,000 square feet, is almost full, with probably the majority of the space is occupied by CropMax, but there are about 4 or 5 other smaller entities that are also operating out of that location. So even that building, which at one time I think many wondered, is that ever going to be put back into productive use, is now being used, and jobs are being created and capital is being invested.
Is it easier to attract a new business, or is it easier to attract, or is it easier to cultivate the businesses you already have here?
It's much easier to grow the businesses that are already here because they've already made a commitment to the community. They already have real estate in the community. They already have their equipment here. But hopefully when they're here and they've been operating successfully for some time, they're also aware of all of the other amenities. They're generally happy with their workforce, and to pick up stakes and move, while it seems like it's salacious and you hear a lot of companies throwing that out there and making threats against states and communities that they're going to leave if they don't get a certain amount of incentives. In reality, it's much harder for them to do that. They've developed a transportation and distribution network for their product, and it's a lot harder than it might sound to just pick that up from a community and take it somewhere else. So we have found that if we can at least have, if we can address workforce skills issues, that's the primary reason that a company would make a decision to stay and grow here, and we're beginning to do that at Coles Together too.
Now, you mentioned some of the competition and some of the, it seems like almost giveaways, it appears to many people, that communities are vying against other ones, and it looks like companies want this tax break or this abutment or that sort of thing. How does those calculations enter into whether or not it's worth a community trying for a new business of sort?
Most times, those incentives that we're able to leverage for local companies are coming from the state. So it's not local dollars that are being given up. There is, however, the Enterprise Zone program that is administered locally, and that allows a company that is involved in industrial development to abate its property taxes and avoid having to pay sales taxes on building materials. And there have been many studies, because it is a big debate and it's a legitimate question, but there have been studies that show that it's a small price to pay to bring the kind of investment in. When workers are hired, they begin paying payroll taxes, they begin buying homes and paying real estate taxes themselves. Of course, they're all paying sales taxes. So it ends up being, it ends up not being a deficit for a community to have something like an enterprise zone program to attract business. The other thing is every state and most competitive communities have it. For those that don't, they're at a real disadvantage. I mean, unfortunately, it does just constantly get ratcheted up, but you have to be able to compete, and to level the playing field, you have to have a program like that.
So the local jobs are worth some of the giveaways, and they're not always local dollars that are being given away.
Most times they're not local dollars. In fact, the enterprise zone program, there's no local money handed over. I mean, it's an abatement of property tax, but the theory goes, you know, if you build a 250,000 square foot facility and you do have an 8 to 10 year property tax abatement, at the end of that abatement period, that is brought back onto the rolls, and all of the taxing districts then benefit until, you know, the end of time. So there's can be an argument made both ways, but I believe, as do most community leaders, I think, because of the fact that the programs exist, that over the long term, they are beneficial for the community.
Now, you mentioned earlier the success Coles Together has had in filling many of the empty buildings. Do we stand a chance of running out of good buildings for people to move into? Is that a problem?
We are out of good buildings for people to move into. We absolutely are. And we do have spaces in the county, for instance, the Coles Business Park and the Mattoon Enterprise Park, where folks could build a building. And it's not uncommon in the industry when there is an RFP that's been circulated for communities to propose a build to suit. And we do have developers that we work with that can probably put up a fairly simple building to specification within 90 to 120 days. So, you know, it's not an ideal position to be in, and there are ways to remedy it, but it does happen.
It's nice not to have the vacant property.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, exactly. So you're talking about some of the successes. What do you consider some of the biggest successes for Coles Together this year?
Well, the Mars project, absolutely. I mean,
Tell us a little bit about that.
And that was a project that we had to compete with an out-of-state location. You know, Mars Corporation has plants around the country, and they do a variety of things, and they're most well known for their candy, of course, but they could have put this Dentastix product line in a number of other locations, and so we had to compete, and we brought the state of Illinois into the negotiation process, and they provided some incentives, though not many. And actually, I would suggest that the Mars workforce did a lot to bring that project here. The Mars corporate officials were impressed with the productivity level of the folks that work here, with the commitment. It's a very low turnover rate, and it was the workforce that got them noticed. And then, you know, we worked with the state and the Mars folks to put together a package for them. But, you know, 25 production jobs, I think 31 jobs in a warehouse operation to support it. And Mars is it's a fantastic place to work. Those are head of household jobs. It's a place where the people are treated fairly, and they have meaningful and very good benefits for families of Mars workers.
Those are the jobs we want here, right?
Absolutely. And they're buying from the ag community in the area too. So it's not just the people that work in the plant. That kind of investment turns itself over several times in a community like this.
So that's a big success. What is a big challenge? What drives you to the edge in trying to juggle these projects?
We have a couple challenges. One is our workforce is very tight. Most of the plants like Mars and Mattoon Precision are very satisfied with the employees that they have. They're having a hard time finding employees to fill some of the new positions. And so that's a challenge for us, trying to address some of the skill shortages maybe in the workforce, trying to, you know, there's a very big problem with people who are able to pass drug tests to go to work in these plants. I mean, you have to be 100% coherent if you're running machinery and there's somebody standing at the other end of it, and drug tests are an important part of that. And so, you know, the drug problem in rural communities is having an impact on the ability for manufacturers to hire. The other problem and challenge that we have is, you know, the state of Illinois is, good, bad, or indifferent, seen as unfriendly to business. With the corporate income tax hike a couple of years ago and worker comp rates high, it's hard when we're competing with right-to-work states, for instance, or states that don't have some of the business expenses that we have, to convince them that there are other reasons to look at Illinois. And it can be done. And if you take a look at most of the states that border Illinois and you throw in all the taxes,
Right.
then we are on a level playing field. But the rhetoric nationally is that we are not. And so we have to overcome that.
There was some talk during the recession about businesses come to Wisconsin, and it turned out that when they went, if businesses that did go to Wisconsin, their taxes were actually higher than they would be had they stayed in Illinois. So, you talked about skill shortages and employee shortages, and this is interesting. You brought up the drug test. What can we do to help elevate our workforce to help keep this growth going?
I think one thing we need to do, speaking of images, is overcome the image that working in manufacturing is undesirable. I mean, people are clamoring to get into Mars. And we tour most of the plants in the community, and many of them are clean and creative and using innovative technology. You have to know how to operate computers, and there's CNC machining going on and 3D printing and just really exciting things that are cutting edge technology inside these. I mean, it's not the factory of your grandfather anymore. And so I think helping folks, first of all, understand that you can have a very productive, both in terms of the creative approach that you can take to your job, but also in terms of the salary that you can earn. You can have a very productive career in manufacturing, and there are opportunities there. So we need to overcome the image that manufacturing is a dirty and repetitive and pick and pack, stand on a line, sweat all day kind of a place to work, because it's largely not that way.
You were talking about the jobs being much more challenging. And you've talked about working in partnership with Eastern and with Lakeland. When do you talk to those entities about skill sets that you're seeing in need in this community?
Lakeland has the Center for Business and Industry that's fabulous in terms of customizing training for local industry, and they've done that. And in fact, some of the programming that they've developed for local plants that are part of a national company, the programming has been replicated at plants throughout the nation because they hadn't been able to get that at their community college in that area. So that's a fabulous resource. Eastern has, and now I'm losing the name of it, the Business Solutions Center, and the SCORE counselors that work there, and then they have some management training that they can offer to those in management in manufacturing. And so they bring a lot to the table too, and they're always willing to work to develop programming, both institutions are, that industry may need.
So we covered helping with location, helping with relocation, helping with employment. What sort of projects did your organization, give me an example of how your organization helped a project along the process and through the process?
One of the ones we've been successful with?
One of the ones you've been, give us an example of how that works.
Okay. Well, we'll go back to the NCI project, National Components Incorporated. They came to us and said, we're looking at Mattoon as an option, but we're also looking at these couple of other states. And a couple of the states were in right-to-work states where we had to compete. That's a cost. Labor costs are one of the biggest costs for industries. So we had to show them that there would be savings here that would offset the labor savings they might see in other states. And so we worked with the state of Illinois. We put a team together. I remember the longest conference room table that you can imagine in Springfield, and bringing IDOT to the table and Department of Ag and Natural Resources, because there are always permitting issues that a company has to deal with, and they have to go through some of those regulatory agencies at the state level. So bringing folks from those agencies to the table to say, these are the things that you're going to encounter, and these are the ways that you navigate through them, so that they would see that it's not insurmountable in Illinois. And the state of Illinois, who was able to give them some training dollars, and they also received, I think, some tax credits from the state. And then, of course, we had the Enterprise Zone program locally. So we put together with a number of entities the best financial package that we can, and then we help to convince them through local resources that there will be a workforce that we can help to recruit. We have the Workforce Investment Board in Coles County, but we also have some fabulous staffing businesses that staff for industry. So helping them understand that once you start to hire, we can help you get folks with the skills, or we can put together programming with Lakeland or Eastern that can help train in those particular skill sets. And at the end of the day, it was a tough decision, I'm told, by their president and CEO, and it came down to us and another one, I think, in South Carolina, and ultimately we won.
So all that hard work paid off.
And you know what? More often, though, it doesn't. I have to be totally honest.
Well, talk about that. What's some of the challenges you can't work through, and how do you find out when a project doesn't pay off? What are some of those issues?
Every project that we work on, we learn something. Every one is a learning experience, and we're able to take away something even if we don't win it. And the biggest example of that, of course, is FutureGen. And I don't think any of your viewers want to have FutureGen rehashed. But you know, every time you go through that, you learn more about your community. You learn more about the resources. You learn what your attributes are or what companies are looking for. You know, there are probably, in an ordinary year, and you're not in the middle of a recession, maybe 30 to 40 RFPs sent out that we meet the minimum criteria for. But like I mentioned earlier, those are going out to communities across the nation. And at the end of the day, there could be something like, one that comes up a lot is barge access. We may meet every other requirement, but we don't have barge access, access to navigable waters.
Right.
So you go through the process and put your best proposal on the table, and then you're eliminated because of something like that. Or Illinois gets eliminated. You know, we could have a very viable site as far as the company is concerned, but for some reason, the entire state and all of the sites that are under consideration get eliminated. So there are a lot of projects that we work on throughout the course of the year that never get to the point where we win something or there's an announcement, and in most cases we can never even mention that we're working on them. In most cases, we don't even know who the client company is.
Oh, that's
you know, we
interesting.
worked on one for a long time that was a Dollar General distribution center. We worked on a Target distribution center. We didn't know until they selected a site in another state who they even were, because we work through site location consultants, and the company remains unnamed. And in the cases when we do know for whatever reason, we're never allowed to say, because, you know, for instance, with Mars, we worked on that for some time before anything ever happened. Mars doesn't want its competitors to know that it's developing a new line of Dentastix for dogs, and so it has to be confidential. Many times we're signing non-disclosure agreements.
So that's you want to shout it to the world, but you can't.
We do, and that's why the past 2 years have really helped to get the word out about what Kohl's Together is doing, because we have had some of those translate into successes.
Now, is it harder to participate in economic development in a rural area as opposed to a more urban area? Are there differences?
There are differences. I wouldn't say it's harder. I would say we have a different set of challenges. Many times we are looked at by companies that are also considering sites, you know, in the suburbs, because the cost is so much lower here. The cost of land and the cost to build a facility, they have a lot of empty buildings that they, you know, spec buildings that they've put on the market up there. And we'll have companies looking down here because it's just so cost prohibitive for them to do something. Now, if it's a transportation issue, you know, they need to be along I-80 or, you know, they need to be near a customer or a supplier, then we can't compete with that. But in terms of costs, a lot of times it makes sense for companies to look at a rural community instead of a suburban area.
Now, to follow up on that, is it a problem for a rural area that you don't have some of the amenities that a more urban area has for the president and the vice president and management group? Is that ever an issue?
Sometimes, occasionally. I would say, though, you know, getting back to earlier when I said comparing Coles County to communities its size, I would say that we're kind of a mix here, and we're fortunate in that we have some of, you know, we have the rural work ethic, and we have, you know, some of the rural farm workers that are coming off of a farm that don't mind working hard, and we have lower cost of land and lower acquisition costs for buildings, but we also have some of the amenities of a more urban area with Eastern and Doudna and the culture surrounding Eastern, and you know, I think that we have a good mix of both. But you know, inevitably there is that executive's wife who wants to be in an area where there's, you know, a lot of shopping that's accessible. Immediately accessible, that you don't need to drive to Champaign for. You know, we lost a project one time when I was in another position because the community did not have a Dairy Queen, and the company president wanted a Dairy Queen. It was a Southern Illinois community, and I was working on behalf of that community, and they picked a town in another state that had a Dairy Queen.
And we only have a minute left, and I have to ask you, what's next for Coals Together? What's next for this area? You can't necessarily name projects, but is it shaping up to be another good year?
It is shaping up to be another good year, and I can say that we are working on a replacement project after the FutureGen project. We are working on another power plant project that has promise. We've been working with them for about 2 years. These things take a lot of time. We're working to address some of the skill shortages in the workforce, whether that's soft skills or how do we address the fact that many people are having trouble passing a drug test, and working with Lakeland to develop programming that industry needs, working on a larger regional effort to address that. So I think that we've moved past the stage where we're still feeling all of the effects of the recession, and we're beginning to think about how is it that we are prepared when the economy really takes off.
Well, Angela Griffin of Coals Together, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for joining us on At Issue today. If you have a topic for us or would like additional information on the topics you've seen on our shows, please send us an email. We're at weiu@weiu.net, and in the subject line put At Issue. For At Issue, I'm Fred Peralta. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.